Welcome back to another episode of The Hip. My name is James Layton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where every single week I bring you a leader from our sector to discuss some of the biggest challenges in UK housing today.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the HIP podcast. My name is Caithlin Knox and I'm the host. Tech transformation and change is what I cover all over the UK, and I've brought together a fine bunch of industry leaders to talk about the importance of collaboration today. Really excited about this one, as I know the questions you've all brought will spark some really good chat. For those that know me, my goal with my panels is to build a community and provide a platform to showcase important discussions that I think should be heard. For me personally, it's a great way to learn more about social housing, which I'm really passionate about. So without further ado, I'd love to get some introductions on the go. So let's start with you, Jason. If you just tell us where you're at and who you are, a bit about yourself, that'd be great.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me, Caitlin. I'm Jason Wickens. I'm a freelance CIO. Been in social housing for over 5 years now. Previously worked for Southern Housing as CIO, and I'm currently doing some work with Saffron Housing Trust, looking at their data and broader piece of strategy work. Prior to housing, I worked in financial services, retail, telecoms, and consulting as well.
Love that. Cheers, Jason. And Darren, yourself?
Thank you, Caithlin. My name's Darren Ryland. I've worked in housing now for over 15 years, always in the IT/change transformation space. And it's a privilege to do so as well. Before Network, where I've been nearly a year, I was at Longhurst Group in the Midlands for 14 years. Prior to that, I was in the automotive industry as an engineer and going into projects. So that's my original background. But moving into the social sector, I've never looked back.
Yeah, no, it's a special space, isn't it?
Cool.
Hey?
And I should say I'm currently IT and Transformation Director at Network.
Yeah.
Quite probably an important addition.
Cheers, Darren. I know. Monday, hey? Simon, over to you then.
Thanks, Caitlin, and morning, everyone. So, Simon Sharkey Woods. I'm the AD and Chief Digital and Information Officer for Slough Borough Council. I've been here since April last year. I've been in and out of the housing agenda since having my first job in application support many years ago. It was 1998 when I was supporting Wellingborough Borough Council. So, I've been around the housing agenda for quite some time. Previously, earlier in my career, I was a private sector, so I did a bit of retail as well with BP on the petrol forecourts, things like that. But a mixture of not-for-profit and local and central government as well. So that's me, really.
Mm-hmm. Love that. All right. And last but by no means least, Rajiv.
Hi, I'm Rajiv Peter, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at Nottingham Genesis. So I'm the Executive Director responsible for technology, data, business transformation. I don't know, my career has been varied, so I started at the start of the local government digital program back in the early 2000s. And then I went to commercial sector, back to the legal sector, commercial real estate, student housing, all that kind of stuff. And I came into NSG as my first housing association. So it's coming up to 6 years now since I started at NSG.
Amazing. I'd like to say a bit about myself as well. I've not actually always been in social housing doing recruitment for here. I was actually in the event industry before the pandemic, where, believe it or not, I was working circus and cabaret shows. I know I think I've told you guys all about that, but I feel it's a very special place in here, and I can't see myself going back to the circus, although my mum probably wouldn't mind me saying that. She lost me for a few years to the circus there. But all right, thanks for introducing yourselves, everybody. So a bit about the format for my series. I invite the panel to bring their own questions, and the goal is for them to shine an insight as to, why they've brought the questions, and then we go around the table and share our own views and our own experiences. So Jason, I'd love to come to you first. If you wouldn't mind reading your question, aloud for everyone, tell us why you brought it today, and then we'll kick off first a bit of the discussion.
Sure. So I thought go fairly broad with my question. I've got some views, but would love to hear the views of the panel, really. What do you believe are the main areas of opportunity for collaboration across the sector?
Oh, Rajiv, let's go.
One that I can think of is around collaborating around vendors. So, that could be around getting us the best deals and the best prices if you work together. I feel in our sector, the traditional vendors have not been innovative enough. And if we work together, I think that's another area where we can really push them, and we don't have to do as much in-house. I think that's the trend now, as we do at the moment. It looks like everybody is trying to create the same technologies over and over again. And that's because the vendors that we have in the space are not providing us the technologies that we need. So I think those are two main ones that I can think of. The other one that I'd say would be around sharing some of the information. So, for example, some of the ratios around how much money is being spent against the revenue. Those kind of things can really help us in terms of our budgets and selling to the board and so on. So I leave the rest of the others to speak about.
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv. Simon, yourself?
So I couldn't agree more with Rajiv about vendors. And actually, if we came together and collaborated more, driving them to be better for us would be a very, very good thing, I think. They are patchy, I think, in terms of their approach to things. That's certainly my experience over the years that I've been involved in things. The other thing that sort of struck me about this question from Jason was just how, as organizations, we should share and collaborate with partners who are not doing exactly what we're doing, but will obviously have contact with the people we're trying to serve. So other partner organizations and working with them to signpost and to get a more coherent service for the residents of the areas where we are working. So whether that's kind of voluntary sector, community groups, or local councils like Slough where I work, I think there is something in trying to have more conversations outside of our own organizations to try and drive better interactions so that we're making it easier and more intuitive for the people we serve to get to what they need. That's kind of the biggest thought that went through my head.
Brilliant. Cheers, Simon. And Darren, yourself then last?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is we can be more collaborative in terms of sharing our experiences, what's going on. And I extend that outside the technology space in terms of change and transformation. What's sticking well? How do we get ownership in our business is working a lot more effectively. I think data as well is a big area we could collaborate a lot bit more on. So I think, and that sharing into also, I think Rajiv touched on it in terms of, what we're spending, how we spend it, that's some real objective measures to kind of drive us in terms of performance as well and reflect on how effective we're being, I think is a good area. I suppose just on the flip side, and, I've got a lot of experience with vendors in the sector, and I'm not saying what is being said doesn't resonate with me, but I think we've got to throw some caution to looking at the vendors as being solely responsible for where we are, whether we've effectively contract managed, whether we've really been in the game. We need to look at ourselves, I think, as well, and really challenge whether we've effectively managed them to what we want. And I think that as a blanket as well to say all our vendors have maybe not, and I'm not suggesting anyone that has suggested this, but I've had experience with some very good vendors amongst the many I've worked with. So I think there's some really good case examples where actually some vendors really do listen. Yeah, so that's my view on that.
Brilliant. Jason, back to you then, now that you've heard, what the panel have said.
I thought of kind of three areas, sort of broadly. Technology in the broadest sense, and top of my mind, wherever I'm working, whether it be permanently or consulting with clients, is housing management software, those types of areas, real issues where we're trying to get true collaboration across the sector. I had suppliers as well, so that's come up, so that's great to see. It's already a theme. And I also completely agree with Darren there, that I think there's an element of not always great suppliers, but also not great supply management and really understanding what our requirements are. I guess the one that I'm seeing right now, firsthand, is around data and this real piece around growing regulatory focus. And I think coming together a bit as a sector on what that's going to need for us in the longer term could be quite useful, and not necessarily looking at it tactically on, what standards you're going to go with or how you're actually going to implement it, but actually what the power of true data can do for an organization. And I think the social housing sector could benefit more than it is today. Definitely think it's changing, but I think there's more opportunities available. But other than that, completely agree with the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we move on from Jason's, questions, anybody else want to add in on after they've heard Jason, share his insight there? Darren?
Yeah, it was a little bit about this conversation being well rehearsed in our sector. It's something that I've been involved with benchmarking groups before. There's something called the Bath Group, which unfortunately ceased running a couple of years back. But we've done lots of benchmarking surveys. We talked about vendors, what was happening, and kind of saw the appetite drain away a little bit in terms of people attending that. And the key question that's going on in my mind now is what's stopping us? What is stopping us doing this piece of work? Because this isn't new. And I'm not suggesting I've got the answer to what's stopping us. My gut feeling is about priority, where everybody is at one time. and having a focus on this and prioritizing it, and potentially more performance metrics on ourselves to share as a sector. It should be a part of our objective. So, that's my thinking. But the key question is, what's stopping us?
Mm-hmm. Simon, I think you might have something to say there just from seeing you there. Any thoughts before we move on?
I agree with what Jason and Darren have said about the supplier management piece. I think there's a lot of organisations, and I've seen this a lot in local government, where a middle or senior manager will be given the job, you're now the contract manager, and they don't really get that heavy support to make them a good supplier or contract manager. And so potentially the use of partnering up with other organisations to work out what they're doing in best practice, exactly kind of what Darren was hinting at. Totally right. I think that's a really clever way of trying to address that issue, actually, because it is a skill. It's a major skill. It takes a lot of experience to be able to manage these, especially some of the big contracts. When you think of some of the suppliers who are in the mix, who are big companies, it's expecting a lot of, say, a middle manager to try and run that contract. So, completely agree.
Brilliant. All right, Rajiv, lastly, before we move on, yourself?
I think all of those things, but also we have got, we are obviously regulated, and we have, some old procurement methods that we use, which we can, it's a nice gift to kind of modernize it. It might work for, traditional or, non-software purchases, but not quite for the modern, OpEx-based models. And sometimes you get into contracts where, and you're stuck with it, which, is very different if you go to the commercial sector. And also the other thing is that, it's not just about the smaller suppliers. I think, for example, in the US, they get better pricing, and, we will be classed as charities in the US for many vendors, while here the rules are changed. And I think that's mainly because we have not come together as a group, as a sector, to change that and to challenge it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Jason, thanks for bringing that question to kick us all off, and some really interesting things said there. Probably do a whole episode based on that question alone, Darren, let's go over to your question now, please. If you can just read it out loud, and then before we go around the table, just share why you brought it with you today, please.
My question was, how do we attract or appeal to talent towards the technology and transformation space in the housing sector? I suppose this question came from multiple angles. The first angle is, do people instantly think about IT transformation and change that goes on in housing? Do they understand housing, the connectivity to what we're trying to do in that space, and the social purpose that we have, and what that can give to people in terms of having a sense of purpose in their work? Also, the other angle is the job market in terms of talent out there and our access to it. It's a very competitive space, particularly at the moment, and it has been for a while. So really wanting to appeal to people and bring them to, what we do, which I think is a really exciting career in people, process and change. So, I just wanted to float that as a question to people, get people's views. How do we do that?
Mm-hmm. All right. Who wants to kick us off? Jason, go ahead.
Happy to kind of share my thoughts. I think it's a key theme everywhere, without doubt. I was reading a report recently, a sort of stat that I've written down on the sort of notepads we have, and the key things you keep going back to, that 70% of leaders are now saying that a skills shortage in the tech space is just stopping them from keeping up with the pace. And, that was a very good piece of research, multi-sector, multi-country. Having been now in social housing for 5 years, I would say the sector, in my opinion, has struggled probably more than others, attracting and retaining key staff. And I think that's due to various reasons. I'm massively sort of broad brushing this, but from what I've seen is there's been relatively lower salaries. So people have simply gone where the money, they've kind of sort of voted with their feet, as it were, where there's been higher salaries. Generally, in the sector for some time, there's been lower levels of innovation. So as you've got people that want to get involved in the more sexy stuff like AI, IoT, if you're still leading an organization that's trying to get the basics right, it's not going to retain those really super smart people that want to get involved in the newer tech. But I also think there's been an element of slow adoption to hybrid working. I came from a sector that had hybrid working, remote working more than 10 years ago. So I do think masses has changed in the last couple of years in the sector. And I think you've had small pockets of RPs that haven't been in the camps that I've just outlined. But broadly speaking, I'd say that's where we've struggled to kind of attract and retain. For me, I was drawn to the sector for its social purpose. And for the key people that I managed to retain, there's been a couple of elements for me. One is they really want that social purpose. The other is it's about routine, for me, seeing the people really develop in their roles. And I know that sounds cliche, but where you've got a bit large enough teams that you can rotate people, you can give them that golden thread. You can ensure that they get development for their short term, but also their longer term. And I've got some people now that have been, in directorates that I've led for at least the time that I've been there. So 5 years within an area, I think in sector is quite a long time now. Be interesting to get Caitlin's perspective. Obviously, she's going to be a really good benchmark in the market. But I would say, it's just about trying to connect to the individual and make that approach slightly more tailored. Probably would be my initial thought.
Well said, Jason. I do have a few thoughts on the matter myself, but I'll go around the table first and maybe circle back to my experiences so far. But Simon, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so I agree completely with where Jason is. And actually, it's not wrong to talk about the development side of things, actually, because it was my number one, actually. I put build a reputation for career growth within your organization. I think it's building a reputation where you can bring someone's career on. If they're just on that cusp of coming into a role where they're hungry for it, but they haven't got all the skills, that's the sweet spot, because you've got them for a couple of years. They're enthusiastic. They want to grow. So getting those tools in place, like having the ability to access good learning, to have good mentors around them, things like that, and build that reputation. It's what saved me in my last organization, definitely, because I was working with technologies that were in very high demand. But it's the same in this sector, I believe, as well, is that you've just got to start working on building that reputation. The big second one for me is about behaviors and attitudes within the organization and the team, especially that the people are coming into, because selling it as, come into our team, you'll do really well. We really want your skills and things like that. And they come in and they find the behaviors of the people around them are terrible. They'll be going again very quickly. They have a real ability to choose at the moment, given where the market is. So we've got to get the cultural stuff right, the behaviors right, and make sure that people feel really welcomed. They come in and they feel this is a place I actually want to stay working in. So for me, those are the things where you've got some control, which you can use to try and retain really good people when they come in and hopefully build that reputation over time.
Well said, Simon, but I'll jump in on there in a little thought. For me, being a consultant, it's when I'm getting to know associations and then trying to recruit for them, culture's a massive thing for me, because essentially I'd be the middle person in this kind of scenario. But there is nothing worse when, I talk about the job really well, the interview stage goes really well, and then their first day is just absolute, trying to think of a phrase. I mean, you're all nodding, you know what I'm trying to say here, but how can we change? I think maybe the recruitment process needs to change a little bit. Like I know myself, I personally do videos where I screen candidates, and the idea of that is to hopefully make the interview process more personal by the time they actually meet the hiring managers, But I think, culture, if you bring in the wrong person or whatever way you want to flip it, it can also be like bringing poison ivy into your home, isn't it, essentially as well? So, but yeah, it's something that I really want to think about. I'd even love to do a whole lot just episode on the recruitment process and, my experiences from what I've learned over the period that I've been in it. But some good things said there, Simon. Rajiv, over to yourself then.
I think a few things that we have done is, for a start, we've got, I don't know whether this is the same in other housing associations, but we do have bandings across the organization. And we've had, so we kind of got banding for ourselves to just make sure that the salaries are, they wouldn't be equivalent to the big players in the market, and we'll never be able to compete with them, but they're pretty reasonable. So we did that change, and we've also got a talent manager in the team. So one of the things that we observed was that when we advertise and people get back to us, we take too long through the normal HR process to get back to them. So we make sure that, somebody's there straight away getting back to the candidates, and then always having something for them to do. So if there are online tests or, there's something for them to do, they're not waiting for us. That shows that, for a start, we are modern and digital, but also that we are very engaged with them. So, we did those things, but the other thing that we did is to get sponsorship status, so we can sponsor talent where we can't find them locally. And also, like Jason said, the ability to work remotely, not exclusively remotely. They do have to come in to the office when they need to, but it is not just for the sake of coming in. We do work with many of the development staff, especially abroad, offshore, in India and Eastern Europe. So what that means is that the staff here, they're doing all the design, all the exciting stuff and all the prototyping and things like that, which kind of engages the kind of people we want to attract and keep them. What we don't really do well is to advertise our social purpose well. And it is really meaningful for the people that have come on and have been with us. We have low turnover compared to others in the sector, others outside the sector. So I think, those are kind of the few things. We've had a tough few years. My feeling is that over the next, maybe a few months, things would improve with many huge organizations laying off tech staff and some freezing hiring. So I'd expect that there'd be more people on the market looking for the kind of work that we have to offer.
I know, well said, Rajiv, and I'll come to you in a little back to you in a second, Darren, but what I've noticed on LinkedIn in general is there's so much more awareness on what housing associations are doing, because there's probably loads of people who don't know what we do or the world that we're a part of, and it's a massive, for lack of a better word, beast that I use, what we're a part of. So I do think these conversations are happening, and the more awareness that we're bringing, it's going to be, like, for me as a consultant, I love picking up the phone, calling someone that's never been in housing, because obviously our skill set's really transferable, and then telling them about our world. And by the end of the phone, they're normally buzzing, which is such a lovely thing to be able to do. So yeah, Darren, yourself, back to you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said. It's been helpful, and obviously it's airing these views, give people a flavour for it, which is great. I think not suggesting it's an elephant in a room in this conversation, but generally the settling after the pandemic and the hybrid work in the return to the office is very much chalk and cheese conversation, I think, that we're still facing. And I don't mind saying I fall on and I advocate hybrid working, because I think from a leadership and cultural perspective, that relationship development and developing trust, it just happens in a different way when people are together. And I think that for me is really, really key. It's the non-work but relationship building conversations that you have that can't be replaced by Teams interactions. But I know how hard you try, and I'm happy to prove them right, but that's my experience and that's my feeling on it. But in that marketplace, we're competing with some tech companies that are quite happy for their technical staff to work completely remotely. Mm-hmm. So they're the kind of the pressures that we're going with. But I want to really firmly stick with that hybrid model, because I think that sort of culture and what we're aiming for in our sector is where I feel that we need to go.
100%, but Darren, we went from one extreme to another, and Absolutely. It's like people will throw their rattle out the pram or their dummy, or whatever expression you want to use. It's like, look, you not meet me halfway. And like, I remember when I first started here, it was my first introduction to like an office kind of workspace, and my head was like exploding. But like anything, it takes, my mum read this book, 21 Days to Break a Habit or something like that there. How mothers read books like that. And within 3 months, I was like, I run to the office now 3 days a week, but those days at home, I do different activities, and I've got more productivity on those days, because obviously when you're in the office, you've got the coffee machine chat and, the let's go to the shop and get a little chocolate bar kind of thing. But growing those relationships and moving together as a team. One thing I said last week on a call I had was that every business isn't just one person, it's a group of people, and you need to kind of have those relationships, you know what I mean? But thanks for bringing that question, Darren. But before I move on to your question, Simon, does anybody else want to add anything on to that at all?
Thanks. Yeah, just to reinforce what Darren was saying, really, just to support it completely, I think there is an element that can't be achieved through the screen that we need to maintain through contact. I think this maybe goes back to the whole thing we're talking about, which is about collaboration, is who is getting these conversations right in the sector, who is actually talking to their workforce in a way which is making sense to them about how to achieve this hybrid working. That would be a useful thing to understand, I guess.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Well, Darren, thanks for bringing that question. We move on to the next one. So that's back on to you, Simon. Keep the mic on you.
Thank you very much. Linked to what I was saying earlier, actually, but what behaviours do you think are the most important to achieve good levels of collaboration? And how do you encourage team members and others in your organisation to exhibit those behaviours?
Yeah. Would you be able to kick off for us first, Simon, before we go around everybody?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think there is a leadership responsibility here. You have to lead by example in this space, because I think a lot of tech teams, especially linked to the skills crisis that they're still out there, that people are a bit heads down and focused on the thing that's immediately in front of them. So thinking a bit more widely and a bit more strategically about connecting with external partners or other similar organizations to gain value from that might not be the thing that's first in their head at any particular time. So we need to try and encourage that behavior and say, no, we see the value in this. We see the value of networking and how you might bring things in as a result of doing that into your organization. So I think it's that leading by example. I think that's, for me, probably position number one.
Absolutely. All right, let's kick this off. So Jason, yourself?
It's almost as if someone's just taken my answer that I kind of had pre-prepped. So we're going to be a little bit repetitive here.
It's a good sign.
Hopefully it's a good sign. I really believe that collaboration should take place at all levels. I've seen organisations where there is an expectation at more junior levels that it's something that senior leaders do, and they're kind of told all the great snippets that we hear. But if it's not taking place, then I think, first of all, the CIO level, top level, really needs to start demonstrating, role modelling, exactly what someone just said. Just demonstrate those behaviours to our teams. I think staff need to see that leaders champion collaboration. For us all, it's not always something that we always feel we really want to do on a Monday morning. Is it really the sort of easiest thing to do? But what I found really useful is highlighting the benefits, some real tangible wins of what collaboration have done. So things like, I've actively said to my teams, we wouldn't know about X if I hadn't had a coffee chat with Y. And also I think in sort of just some practical terms, just labeling some of the great networks that are already out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm not sure if I can mention any by name. I can't, then I won't say them by name, but there are a few that are really good already out there in sector that I regularly attend. But also collaboration can start as small as just having a coffee. And that's the bit I've tried to instill with my leadership team, which is some of my best ideas have simply come from really informal discussions that I've had with people. And we just talked about the benefits of hybrid. Completely agree with Darren. I think there's elements of that, around the water tower or around the coffee machine. If someone was to say to me, and maybe this is a challenge for me as a leader, is I'm going to put half an hour a week in your virtual diary and we'll have a Teams chat with no subject. I would probably initially feel that as that's half an hour I could be doing work. But actually I might spend half an hour in a day in the office just having random conversations with people. So I think it's just about the whole piece of, usual stuff, sharing best practice. But in terms of the barriers, I also think, going to sort of Simon's earlier part of the question, often I found people can be reluctant to collaborating because a little bit of either personal or maybe organisational insecurity. You're sharing things that you necessarily don't want to or gives you some form of advantage. But I personally couldn't advocate collaboration enough. I think it's really, really useful.
No, brilliant. Thanks for that, Jason. Rajiv, let's go over to you.
About collaboration between organizations, I think it needs to start at home, as in within the company. I mean, traditionally techies are a little bit insular, and when they come here, we have a duty to kind of show them what they are doing, the end result of what they're trying to achieve, and why what all of this work is going towards. So, we have to show leadership in the sense that we have to show why are we doing these things. For us, it's, better customer service, better homes, better communities. And we have to give them some space to understand those things. And they need to collaborate with our colleagues in other directorates and departments and teams. I think that's really crucial more than anything else in terms of my team when I think about it. So we do have, at least once every quarter, everybody meets up, and not tech, but just very broadly what are we doing. They have created their own charter around, not tech, around what they are here to provide, why we exist, that kind of stuff. And on the cross-organizational stuff, we do have quite good collaboration in some areas. For example, in security, there's already a group of people that meet very regularly to collaborate and network. So there are some, and more recently, there's been a WhatsApp group with all of the leadership trying to exchange ideas, opinions, answering questions, and so on. And there's also a LinkedIn group with information like, what are the things that we're doing? What are the projects that we're doing? And, what can we learn from each other? So it's not just the leaders, but also the professionals, developers, and so on, they can meet each other. And, if the learning has been had somewhere else, we can just adopt it. So it is absolutely crucial. Like I said, there are some that have already started. I think maybe the momentum is not there as much as it should be, but there's lots of benefits to doing that, both internally and externally.
It's the art of conversation, isn't it, really, as well? Like, we've also been through a pandemic. There's people that, like myself, I'm incredibly extroverted, but now after the pandemic, I'm kind of a bit of both, and it's like, how are we encouraging people to speak, coming out of that shell, because we're not too far past it as well. But no, I'm a big believer in some of the best memories in my life and the happiest moments in my life are when I've known what was going on. And that all comes down to communication and collaboration. So I think it's all very closely linked, professionally and personally. But I was going to say, Darren, over to you then.
Okay, so I suppose leadership and my approach, I'd like to think that my team would say the same, but it's all about behaviour. And there are a couple of cliches, like how we do things is more important than the what, because I think the how does look after the what. If you really face up to things and confront things together and as a team, and you do that in the right spirit, the kind of performance will follow through. And that is very cliche. And the other cliche I probably use quite a lot is come to me with a proposition, come to me with a solution. So, because we can all see the problems, but the real thinking and the real creativity starts when you say, okay, I can see that problem. How do we solve it? And those things really shift people's approach, I think, when they're working together. But beyond the cliche, you've really got to demonstrate that as a leader and do it yourself. And if you're going to advocate that way of being, then you've got to behave that way of being. And it's catching. I think we're very pack orientated, but bad behaviours spread, good behaviours spread. So if we live that as leaders and we ask it of other peers as well who are leaders, there's a tipping point. And I've seen that in teams where people say, oh, that's how we're starting to behave. And it just encourages and it just creates a more creative environment. But, and a little bit of fun layered on it as well. We need to be very professional, but to bring some joy into the workplace is really important to me. So behind the cliche and then kind of the behaving of the cliche, I think the third thing is actually like really walking the walk. So doing the development and training, investing in people's development from both a technical expertise point of view in terms of the technical skills they need to do their job, but doing things like coaching and mentoring, emotional intelligence, understanding their behaviors, how their behaviors and their default personalities interact with other people. And there's some really good stuff that goes on in our sector that develop the whole person and getting that balance between the person development and the technical development. So those three strands, sentiment all the way through to actually doing something about it and investing in people, I think all needs to stand up together. And that being a whole organisational wide cultural approach, probably how I surmise how leadership should be from a behaviour point of view.
I love it. You got to get to know what people want. I think it's probably fair to say in our space, everyone's naturally really progressive and they get it, not itchy feet, that's the wrong words, but they want to help out, they want to do more. Like especially when you get into social housing and you see the journey that we're a part of, and there's a massive mission to come on into the 21st century, so well said there, Darren. Rajiv,
could I just add one small bit to that? And I think the important thing is that we're not all happy and we're not all clapping every day of every week of every minute. And being a part of the team and having that report is kind of seeing when other people in your team are not feeling it. Mm-hmm. So pulling each other through. And I think that's an important thing as well. We're not always at a high level. And
yeah, no, we're human at the end of the day, and what's the word I'm trying to say for that? It's just that being aware, or and also being confident to say, look, do you want to have a little one-to-one, little e-coffee, and just chat about X for 15 minutes or whatever? It's about creating that space of. We've our managing director here, Marcus Blackford's very close to my heart, and I just know if I needed anything, I could just go to his door, and just having that energy, I think is very, very important to have as a leader. And probably on that, I'm sure you guys have maybe experienced a bad leader in your life, but not always natural progression is management. Do you know what I find? Some people just go up and up and up, but really they should be probably not. And no disrespect to them, but I'm a big believer in you can't force someone down the management route if that just seems like natural progression. And be a hard conversation to have, but I'm sure there'd be something else for them. Do you know what I mean? Simon, back to you then. How are you feeling now that you've heard everything that the guys have said?
It's really reassuring. And I take what Darren said, actually, that I think the new cadres of leaders coming through now are much more in this space. And I think there are fewer of the type that, especially I can think of in my 30-something year career, which I still shiver about now, which are now passing into history as we start getting a bit more aware of what it takes to help people to be the best they can at work. So it's really great. The development point as well, Darren, I think really, really sound. I think for me, I remember in my last organization, I did a presentation skills course with other members who were much more junior than me within the same organization. They're kind of looking at me saying, but you're one of the senior leaders. Why are you doing this? I said, because there's always room for improvement. And it's just setting that kind of expectation for people that whatever level you're at, there's still learning to be done, especially in our industry where we have to keep up to speed with everything that's going on. It's really, really important. So those are some of the behaviours that we can show to sort of get people encouraged and enthused to follow suit and do those things. It's not about just having people with specific roles doing collaboration like business partners. It's something that everyone has to get involved in.
Mm-hmm. That's it. No, brilliant. All right. Well, thanks for bringing that question, Simon. All right. Well, last question then from Rajiv. If you wouldn't mind reading it aloud and sharing why you brought it with you today, please.
We collaborate quite a lot as organizations. So we go into joint ventures on pretty big, significant projects. We have had joint procurement frameworks and so on. But when it comes to technology, we don't collaborate as much. I mean, in terms of what we have created. And I think it's kind of like full circle from the first question around, each of us developing our own technology individually, which is very expensive, very complicated. And, in terms of maintenance, if we collaborate, it's going to be much cheaper. So I'd like to know, what is stopping us? What are the barriers in us collaborating and adopting each other's technology?
It's a big question. Who wants to go first? Darren, yourself?
I think that in principle, there is a lot that could be achieved. I suppose I'd start off by saying, what is the key driver? Because if it's financial, if that's one of the key drivers, obviously that's something that's really important because we should be returning that value for money to our customers ultimately. But the model, which is bigger, means do you have the infrastructure and the staffing and the contract management? Do you have the core skills to be able to work in that way and the governance that's created it? So is there, when we think about the financial side of it, is it as cost effective as we might think from the outset? And I think doing more investigation around that is needed to validate it. I think there's other side to this is that I think about this as a kind of from the process and people perspective as well. And also the other element, which is data. If we all together had this great technology today, our data is in a different state. The skills of our people are in a different state. The will and the leadership of all those different functions and our target operating models probably we're all doing the same thing, but there will be unique things within them that will need alignment. Like I said, the condition of our data that is the lifeblood that runs through that technology to make it effective. It's whether that really equates to better performance and outcome for all those areas. So there's a lot of alignment and readiness of going into this that's not just about the technology. I'm agreed in principle. I think it's a really good concept. But how you take it from concept to delivery, and when we're all slightly just at different stages in our evolution as well, we've all got slightly different priorities, and how we all come and get on a set of tracks together, and how that looks, and the governance around it, and the infrastructure and skills and attributes. Like we talked earlier about contract management, we talk about change management, growing, and how that is really done are big questions that are not insurmountable, but ones that need to be validated and worked through.
Brilliant. Well said. Darren, and over to you, Jason, then.
I'm going to take the question in two parts. I think there's the first part, which is like what's stopping us generally, and then there's kind of this sort of specific question around tech. I think what's stopping us, if you were to ask most senior housing professionals about what's stopping collaboration, I think a lot would say time. Initially, there'd be a real sort of, it's just the time. It's the time to get it. It's the time to understand. It's the time to have the conversations. Investing in collaboration, we've already talked about that, and I've I've bored you already with why I think it's so important. It takes time to collaborate. It takes time to build into your diary, to be strategic, to think broadly, to look and try to join dots that you wouldn't naturally see in our day jobs. Therefore, collaboration needs to become part of your day job. I've seen personally instances where individuals are reluctant to collaborate on specific topics because I think there's a fear of giving away IP and also maybe a sense of a competitive advantage. And I've worked in other sectors where collaboration is much more difficult and it actually is probably more risky if you're giving that away, which is why I think social housing actually has a massive opportunity to collaborate because we're not really directly competing in the sense we're all trying to do the same thing. But in terms of what's stopping us on the tech side, the first thing to mind that comes to me is very similar to what Darren's gone to, which is there are so many different technical and cultural footprints that are out there. You add on top of that the complexity of the different sizes in RPs and then the different funding that's available, etc., etc. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think when you've got your day job, you're looking at collaboration, you're thinking about actually should we go into one new piece of software that we're all collectively going to use? It gets very, very complex very, very quickly. When you start to look at, yes, the benefits are there, massive scalability, huge commercial benefit. I completely agree, Rajiv. I think there's massive commercial benefit if we combine those models. But when you start to turn it into your practical plans, often what happens is it's easier to kind of deliver against that existing organizational list of priorities because they can be so different. So I guess in summary, what I'm saying is the synergies that could make it possible, but sometimes the daily practicalities or the things that an org just has to get done makes that more tricky, would be my view.
Yeah, no, some interesting, brilliant things said there, Jason. I think for me, just from essentially I'm bringing you guys all together to collaborate, and when I do meet you all for the first time, I'm talking about the importance of collaboration. And more often than not, I do meet people that wear about 17 hats in their organization and they just don't have time to breathe. And I think exactly what you said there, Jason. I know people that are scared to put things in their diary, because they're afraid of people, but it's actually just a coffee with somebody, but it is still collaboration, and I think you said that beautifully. You've got to make time to collaborate. And Simon, over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. So I agree with what Jason was saying completely. I think there is the constant, you're always dealing with the urgent and not the important, and collaboration is really if you're going to get value from it. I think when I was looking at this question, Rajiv, I was thinking about the history here because of where did housing associations come from in the first place? And the legacy of all of that took them down particular routes for their own organizational journeys. And I think where you've ended up is, yes, through acquisition, some of them have grown and changed and morphed that way. But outside of that, people have stayed, they're pretty much in their own swim lane. So I've seen a lot of the time. And I think it's left us with, I think what you were saying, Jason, about the technology stuff is actually quite different in places now. And the approaches are very different. And so the investment in time and energy to come together to really collaborate really well in quite a detailed and meaningful way that will save money and effort is quite an ask, actually. It's quite an ask. I've got a bit of my history was working in the connection service. If you remember those, they took over from career services in England. The government, in its wisdom, decided that every connection service in each region should have its own system to serve up to a national body with the same information. Now, if you think of the nonsense of that, effectively we created a whole market which was in competition and et cetera, et cetera. And the way that we did collaboration then was on the platforms that we did. So we had the user groups typically around those platforms that we used. And that was the best collaboration we could do. Or actually a decision that might have been better, might have been, I'm drifting potentially into politics here, might have been to say, we'll create a central system nationally that everyone will use. But as I say, I think the way that housing has worked has diverged so much. I think that's a big ask. And therefore, as you were saying, Darren, I think the value case would have to be tested really well to make it really worth the time and effort to do it.
Cheers. Simon, Rajiv, how are you sitting after hearing what the guys have said? Anything you want to add?
Well, I do agree with everyone else. I think change is really hard because the current mechanics of how you acquire software, and moving away from that into something new is quite complex. So, and also it needs to be commercially driven, like the others have said. So, I do acknowledge all those things. I do still think that the amount of money that is going into technology these days, even using the same kind of platforms like AWS or Microsoft platforms, which is the general trend, it does not make sense that we are spending hundreds of millions of public funds, or essentially funds that could go into building more homes for those that need it. If we can make that available through collaboration, we should definitely do it. And I think that, once we have the first few go into that kind of collaboration, I think it will become easier. And it's not without the hurdles that others have mentioned, but we should try.
Absolutely. And it all starts with these podcasts. Bit of collaboration, All right. But really, really brilliant questions today from everyone. So thanks so much for bringing them. Is there anybody else wants to add anything else to Rajiv's question before we say cheerio for today? No? All right. Well, guys, thanks so much. I've learned a lot from this. I really hope you guys are taking away something too. And look forward to having hopefully you on again. I think literally alone from what I could probably pick about 6 different things to start new topics with after hearing all your views today. So that's brilliant. And like I always say, your respective places are very lucky to have leaders like yourselves behind them. Thanks again for your time. See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye, hosting, Caithlin.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Hip. If you'd like to hear more from us, please be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast platform. We are also running a 30-minute clinic free of charge to any clients that want to recruit in a more inclusive way. For more information, please reach out to us on our website, andersonjames.com.